Hello everybody. I've been sitting on this for a while, but there is just so much talk going on about Dungeons and Dragons and Wizards of the Coast and what's been happening. And most recently, there has been a fireside chat, which I believe is available on the internet in full. But I watched only the part that actually pertained to, because it was a Hasbro fireside chat for investors. And Hasbro owns Wizards of the Coast, which in turn is the company that produces both Magic the Gathering and um, Dungeons and Dragons, maybe other things as well, but these are the two things that were being discussed and are probably most relevant at the moment because both are or have been causing a lot of controversy among the fan base. And this was an investor directed chat. So, of course, if you've ever worked in any kind of industry where you're working for a company that is actively trying to either attract new investment or convince its current investors, if it's a listed company somewhere on a stock exchange, that everything is fine and everything will get even better. Please do not sell our shares. Everything's going to be hunky-dory and we will grow because this is what this is about. It's always about growth. And here is how we are going to grow. Then if you have not really been very successful, if you're really new and starting out, then of course, any form of growth is if your investors believe in the business model, and we saw a lot of businesses grow exponentially during the pandemic for various reasons. Um, then if you have very little growth at the moment, then any growth that is just like even by 50% is considered great. And if you only earned $100 this year, 150 will be a 50% increase on your return on investment. So that's brilliant. However, if you've had a really, really great run and possibly have never made as much money with your whatever it is that you're selling, service, goods, whatever, then of course you come from a much higher base. And then if you want to convince them to invest more, suddenly the amount of growth that you have to promise, and I'm talking about promising because no one can look into the future, nobody knows what's going to happen, um, has to be in a very, very, very high figures. And of course, when you are talking to investors, you're quite often talking to CFOs, you're talking to finance people, you use a certain language when you speak to them. Just like when you go to a role-playing table and people start talking about AC, THACO, if it's the old version of Dungeons and Dragons, HPs, skill points, there is a certain lingo that you're going to use. And a lot of people have taken the Wizards of the Coast representatives to task for saying things like under-monetized, etc., lifestyle product, blah, blah, blah. Now, one can feel about this however one wants, but what we have to understand is that those were business people that were being addressed by other business people. And we just have to accept that since Wizards of the Coast, like Ulysses Games, like Pegasus, like Chaosium, like um, Goblin Press, like whatever they are called, Free League, etc., blah, 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 have not only got creative talent that works for them, but they also have to have somebody who looks after the money. And I'm not saying that somebody who's a gamer cannot be a good CFO. I'm not saying that one bit, but I'm not saying that somebody who is a CFO and not a gamer is not somebody who's able to run a game studio. Because at some point, you are going to leave the three-bedroom flat um, somewhere on Lake Geneva, um, and you just have to expand. And then it is important to get somebody on board who knows how to attract investors, how to invest themselves, how to protect whatever it is that you're doing from a legal point of view as well. So looking into trademarking, looking into what is copyrightable, looking into maybe even patenting certain things. So this is really important. If you are just a very good scientist and you make the best vaccine ever, but you have no idea how to market it, you have no idea how to actually fund further research, this vaccine is going to be dead in the water. Just to take a very recent example, because we've just come out of a pandemic. So those of you who get upset by what was said in the fireside chat, calm down, please. This was not meant to be addressed to fans. This was not an outlook on what Wizards of the Coast may be planning from a creative standpoint, and it wasn't meant to be. Now, however, of course, they were talking and sketching out a timeline of things that they are going to do, and the fact that they use terms like under-monetized is something that I can totally relate to, because I think that they are right. And I've said in another video, and I owe this to a lady from Ireland, and her channel is called Discourse Miniatures, where she actually explains a couple of things that I wasn't aware of, because I've never really spent time thinking about season passes, because I don't play that many video games, and DLCs, don't really affect me either. However, what I'd never thought about, but she's absolutely right about, and lots of other people have been saying this recently as well, is that RPGing is a very, very cheap hobby. If you have a group of friends that get together to play a game, really, if it's Dungeons and Dragons, the only thing you need is the player's handbook and maybe the bestiary, the monster manual. That's all you need. And I think this goes for most games. When I think of Midgard, you need the Codex, which is basically the basic rule game. You need the Bestiarium, so basically the bestiary, and in this case you also need the Arcanum, because all of the spells and all of the magic use is in a third book. But if you have these 3 books, that's all you need. You don't need to buy any world building information, because you can build your own world. You don't need any adventures, because you can make them yourself. And if you've got a group of friends, let's say 4 people coming together, you could buy 1 copy for the whole group of each of the books that are required and then share it. So maybe you have 4 people and then you pay, I don't know, maybe 100 euros in total. So it's 25 bucks per person. Then you need dice. They come very cheaply on Amazon. You can get them for pretty much nothing. You could go to a local game store if you have one where you can get specialized dice. And then, of course, there is the question of the character sheet. Those are usually copyrightable for, they're copyable for personal use. You just go to a copy shop, you copy them if you don't have a scanner at home, or you can go old school and just basically write it yourself, or you type it yourself and then you print it off. But you can get away with paying very little money, and then you can have decades of fun. Now, for a company, that is a terrible business proposal to make to investors, because they will go, okay, so how many people do you have in your fan base? 1 million. Okay, how many of those DM? 20%, 200,000. So if we have 200,000 people who will buy our product for $100 or euros or whatever, you're going to make 20 million bucks. But you bring it out now, because let's say it's a completely new game that you're putting out and you have attracted 1 million people of a fan base, however you did it, 200,000 going to do this, 20 million bucks will be made, and that's it. And then maybe every so often somebody else will come and buy a book. That's a terrible business proposal. Nobody's going to invest. So you need to ensure that those other 800,000 are also going to spend money. And that is absolutely understandable. And that is nothing new. This is not something that Dungeons and Dragons Wizards of the Coast is doing now. TSR did it. Gary Gygax did it. He went to Hollywood and he struck deals with the entertainment industry. Making the animated series, things like that, thinking about maybe writing comic novels. And of course, there have been D&D novels. I mean, it's not like this is something new. And there are people who have first read, let's say, the Dragonlance novels, and then they were a huge success. And then, of course, they wanted to play. So this is not a new thing. This is not a new thing. Because even back then it was under monetized. And so what they're now trying to do is they're trying to put this out as a lifestyle product. So there's going to be a movie next year, and they want to ensure that people buy into this. And lots of people do. I mean, we've had miniatures for a very long time that you can buy. Um, you can, and also, this is another thing. This has all created a third market where, and this is where it gets interesting, third-party producers produce products that somehow relate to Dungeons and Dragons or that relate to the hobby. So, for example, I buy character portraits. I go to um, different artists and I say, well, this is my character and I want you to draw it. And I'm going to pay for it. And then it's mine and I can use it. I can use it on my channel. I can build a token for Roll20. So that's again a third market, which one, of course, knows Wizards of the Coast will never be able to, or I would have thought would never have been able to cater to, because there I would have to talk to an actual person and I would explain to them what I want my character to look like, and then they would come back with an artistic rendering of what I've told them. Then there's a back and forth, and then at the end of the day, we will have a product that I'm happy with, that the artist is happy with. I pay my money, and then it's mine. So basically, I own it. That's also very important. Who owns it? And so they are now saying, we want to do this too. And we're going to do this in a number of ways. Number one, we have bought one D&D. We're going to build a gaming platform. And basically, you can go in there and you can run the games. Why is this important? Well, since the pandemic, or during the pandemic, there was a run on D&D because people suddenly had all of that time on their hands, but at the same time, they couldn't leave their houses. Lots of people were at home being partly or fully paid because they couldn't work. So what do you do? And I mean, playing games like this is something that's great because unlike a tabletop board game where it's not so bad if you sit around it, because I've played tabletop emulators, none of them really appealed. But here it's different because you're telling a story and you don't really have to physically manipulate pieces, because you can play any role-playing game without actual minis, without actually sitting around a table and manipulating real-life pieces. If you really do want to do it, you can use Roll20 or any number of other virtual tabletops like Foundry or whatever. And that was very successful. You could also see that the number of platforms that allow you to stream, the number of platforms that allow you to broadcast video and voice to accompany anything that might be happening in Roll20, or to be the main channel of exchange, rose and have been increasing their revenue, but also have been increasing the quality of what they're producing and what they're providing. So now they're saying, we want in on this. So they bought D&D Beyond. They're going to turn this into an online platform. And this is now where it gets critical, and this is where I'm also critical of this whole development. Because it seems like what they're trying to do is to go down the road of only providing online content or online usable content for D&D Beyond, for their own platform. Because at the moment, and this is what I have also done, you can get Roll20 packages of published 5th edition adventures. So for example, I bought Lost Mine of Phandelver, which was the way I launched my D&D campaign for my Patreons with my gaming group, because I really wanted to run D&D, and and the packages offer good value for money. You've got all of the monsters in there, you've got all of the maps, and it's all been prepared with dynamic lighting, and so it's really charming and good. And then I went on and I bought Tyranny of Dragons, because we're going to play a little bit in this area, but I'm going to change the content completely. But there are bits and pieces in there that I want to use and that are very, very usable and helpful. And of course, for those of you who are watching our channel, you will have seen our Cursor Strat, where we are using the Cursor Strat module on Roll20. So if they now say, we're just going to go D&D Beyond, it would mean that Roll20 will not have access to this, to any new development, if this is what they are really going to do. I don't know if this is actually legally possible, because one could argue they are destroying a competitor. But then again, since they hold the rights to, let's say, Tyranny of Dragons and anything that they produce for 6th edition, they could well say, well, we're not going to give you the rights, or you can have the rights, and we're going to ask you to pay us X amount of money, and then Roll20 might be saying, like, oh, we can't afford this. We don't make enough money off of this in order to pay what you want. Then, of course, the result will be that Roll20 may go under. Because if people who are playing D&D and who want to play 6th edition cannot do this on Roll20, they might move away to 1D&D, whatever it's called, and then spend their money there. Why would I have a subscription for a tool that I'm not using? I gave up my Netflix subscription in 2020 because I wasn't using it. In spite of the pandemic, I wasn't watching any TV, so I just scrapped that. And they would do the same there. So Roll20 would lose, I don't know how many percent of its user base. And so chances are that it will close down. Then the next question is, what happens, and this is something that I have no answer to, and I've not found anyone who has been able to or has commented on it. What happens if I bought content on Roll20 and then Roll20 goes under and falls? What about the content that I own? Will they make it available in a downloadable version? Or will they actually just go into maintenance and say, we're going to provide you with a framework somehow that you can still use it? Or is it just gone? Which again brings us back to digital isn't a good thing, because if you move from one platform to another, whatever you may have been able to run on a previous platform, something that you owned, is suddenly no longer usable. Which is why books are better, because you can always use them as long as you have light and 2 eyes, or even 1 eye. So this is a potential thinning out of the herd. They are getting rid of a competitor, which they can do. It's not forbidden, and it's not even nice or unnice. It's just something that may happen. However, then other people might say, oh, actually, I'm not going to do 6th edition anyway. I don't care. I don't need, and this would be me. I don't need another edition. I counted the other day, RuneQuest, Midgard, DSA, D&D 5th edition, Advanced D&D, and Cypher. 6 fantasy compatible or fantasy solid based gaming systems in my bookshelf. I really don't need another. I even have the One Ring first edition, which is a crappy system, so I won't even count it there, but it's got really nice art. So if I really wanted to, I could just take any of these systems and just say, we're going to play this, regardless of if there is a new edition, regardless of if this is the most recent edition, because we could build our own stories just using the system, because that's all it is. It is just a car, and I can decide to drive the old roads with my car. I don't need to go to the new place where I need a car that can swim, because there's still enough of Europe that I haven't seen. So this would be one way of doing this. However, and this is something that I wasn't really aware of, because I haven't been paying attention to the industry because I don't care, is apparently that there was some kind of survey and it indicated that there is a huge, huge problem that there aren't enough dungeon masters for D&D. And I found that quite interesting because this is not something that I find surprising because most people I know don't want to dungeon master because it takes time. It's an effort and you have to be absolutely 100% dedicated to it. So as a player, you can show up with your character sheet, maybe some memories of what happened last time, and just play. But as a dungeon master, you have to have a lot of time to prepare, and you cannot just sit there and go, "Oh well, I don't know what's going to happen now because I didn't read the fucking adventure." Um, you have to have an idea if it's your own adventure of where you want to go. Depending on your play style and your group's play style, this may have to be a very, very stringent idea, especially if you're running a one shot, for example, because then you have to hit the points and you have to drive the players through it because it has to end after 4 hours. If it's a meandering thing, like our campaigns, which when we say, oh, this is a two shot, we usually end up playing 3 to 4 sessions, because we just never find the end because we just keep going left, right, and, and then take wrong turns. And, but that's our play style. We're all happy with it. But sometimes even we feel we need to get back to the plot. But as a dungeon master, you have to know the plot and you have to stick to it and you have to be there to basically corral in your players and you have to prepare. So of course, not everybody wants to do this and not everybody can do it for various reasons, family commitments, time, and you also need to like it because it involves a lot of reading, it involves a lot of thinking, it involves a lot of maybe even drawing maps or, finding stuff on the internet, doing research, blah, blah, blah. So I'm not surprised that there aren't that many people who want to do DM, especially since there seems to be something that's called the Roll20 effect. Sorry, not Roll20, Critical Role effect. Apparently, some people have been watching Critical Role. I've never watched a single episode, so I can't say what it's actually like. And then this brought them into the hobby, and now they want to play this. Now, the way I understand it is that Critical Role has its own world in which their story is set. So, and this is where we now approach a different topic, and that is copyright. If this is true, then if you go to a different gaming group, they wouldn't actually be allowed technically to play in this because this world is copyrighted by whoever runs Critical Role, whatever their name is. So if you expect to have this, then one would have to ask Critical Role, can we use your world? And if they, for example, release a book about it, then you could buy the book and then you could use it. Then again, the question is if you want to do it, because I have no idea if there is a book and also how expensive it is. So they are like Wizards of the Coast, only called Critical Role, and they build their own world. There are other people who build worlds. That's not a new thing. Numenera is a world, for example, that was built, as far as I understand, by Monty Cook, who also used to work for Wizards of the Coast, by the way. So, and then they go there into the gaming group, and then it's not like Critical Role. And then they are annoyed and they basically pound on the dungeon master. Of course, if you meet lots of people who say, yeah, but you're not like Critical Role, you would probably start thinking, well, then maybe sod you, then I will not DM for you, or I will find other people that I can DM for. So it could well be that the people who say there aren't enough DMs are people who cannot find a DM that is like what they see on TV, as it were. And so then the next question is, how are you going to, because this is going to directly impact Wizards of the Coast's revenue stream. If there aren't enough DMs, but if there are many people who want to play, then you need to create more DMs so that people will continue to spend money on the hobby. And apparently there are also DMs that ask people for money when they run games for them, which I find is absolutely ridiculous. But hey, so WotC is faced with a couple of dilemmas. Number one, only a fraction of the people who actually are in the hobby buy products. So we need to increase this. Then there are people who would like to get into the hobby and possibly spend money on it, but who can't get into the hobby because they don't have a DM. And then thirdly, you have people who make money off of whatever it is that WotC produces. And I'm using the word whatever WotC produces because you have to be very careful, because not everything that they claim they own is actually owned by them, but we'll get to that. So essentially, WotC has this trifecta of problems. So number one, how to encourage the DM. You do this by providing a very easy to use rule set. Number two, you do this by providing something that requires very little time to prep, something that you can do over and over and over again, and maybe industrialize the role playing experience, bringing people in and saying, okay, well, here you can play on this platform. There will be a DM available. You can play whatever game you would like. Here's a list. And it's like DMing as a service. And in order for the DM to do this smoothly, we provide you this online platform with all of the dungeons prepared, and you just have to run through it. Lots of things will be automated, blah, 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 blah. Um, so, and you have to pay for this, but also the players will have to pay for this. So we're going to make money off of both of you. Brilliant. So you solve these two issues. And for DMs that actually want to either make money streaming the stuff or want to make money by running games and getting paid by players for it, this is very easy because the prep time reduces dramatically. Um, I mean, Curse of Strahd plays differently depending on the group makeup that you have. We've now discovered that there are two areas already where we have run into situations with our group which would have played differently if the group had had a druid or had not had a cleric. So, if you have run this once, you have probably read the whole book, at least once as a DM. And then if you want to play this again and make money, you just bring in different players. And even if it's the same group and they say, oh, we want to do another run, like you do another run of video games, but we have a different setup, then, and of course you have the randomization using the tarot cards at the beginning, so it always plays out slightly differently. You can actually do this, but you only had to read it once. You only had to do the prep work once. You also have it in Roll20 in this case already, so it's going to be a lot easier. And if you do this and if you think this through, going digital in this way is going to make it a lot easier for upcoming DMs, for people who are already DMing and want to reduce the time that they have to spend on this to make money, and the experience will be a lot more recognizable. So when I watch somebody running one D&D games and streaming them and I go, oh, this is what I want as well, and then I go to the platform and then I sign up and then I get into a group, the experience will be so much more streamlined and it will be something that I already know. It's like when you look at video games, and there is such a thing that I only learned this week. It's a Souls game. So it has to do with the fact that there was a very successful game called Dark Souls. It was also turned into a board game. And there are Souls clones. Demon Souls apparently was older, but Elden Ring is apparently just the same thing. I played Elden Ring. I think it's a terrible game. So maybe I don't like this kind of game. But this is the type of game which has a certain um, hallmark of things that happen in the game, possibly very opaque to no story, going in, grinding, killing, then meeting a boss, blah, 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 blah. So this seems to be some of the salient points that are associated with this. Or anything that looks like Resident Evil but isn't called Resident Evil is a Resident Evil clone, and they satisfy certain requirements that players have, but then it may have a different storyline, or it should, because the storyline can be copyrighted. It will have different characters, probably, hopefully, because otherwise there will be a copyright issue, but they look and feel the same, even from the graphical point of view, and the things you do, certain ways in which you attack, blah, 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 blah. So, and this is now where WotC could hit big money, because you have all of these people who want to be cool, because today Dungeons and Dragons is cool. It was never cool when I was a kid. Um, and they want an experience that they are familiar with. They don't want to see anything new. They don't want to go maybe even through the grind of going through the player's handbook, making a decision, what do you want to play, understanding the rules, although Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition is a very basic rule set. I mean, it's super simple. And then they just want to go in there and maybe even not play it, but consume it. And I'm using this word because I think that's what's going to happen. People are going to consume the game. It's very different from actually playing a storytelling based game. And I'm not criticizing this. I'm just saying that this is probably what the direction that people are going in. And maybe this is also why role-playing games have been such a niche product for a very long time, because it isn't for everybody, but you can turn this into something that has a mass market appeal. And then if you take a multi-pronged approach and then you bring in the movie, and I mean also Magic the Gathering has got crossovers with Dungeons and Dragons and vice versa. There's the Strixhaven book, which has been released for Dungeons and Dragons, which apparently wasn't greatly successful, but I don't know, I never got it. But then you have like Baldur's Gate and Forgotten Realms cards for Magic the Gathering. So they're trying to cross-fertilize the two franchises. I don't know if this is actually very successful, but you know, so you basically see it in so many different areas. Um, then of course it's ubiquitous on YouTube. I don't know how many people stream Dungeons and Dragons games. Like, I don't know how many times I've seen Rime of the Frost Maiden played. We're playing Curse of Strahd. Other people have been playing Curse of Strahd as well. So they are there. And if I want to know what it's like, I just have to turn on the TV and watch that, you know? I may like it, I may not like it, but it's available. So you basically see it everywhere, and then you say, oh yeah, I want to do this too. And as soon as you've got this brave new world, shall we call it, of 1D&D, where everything is super streamlined and where everything looks exactly the same and is predictable, it will make it easier for people to get into the hobby. And then they will start buying into it. And then this is where the DLC idea comes in, and I don't know if this will actually happen, but they say that they assume that you will be able to buy customizable characters. So you have like a 3D environment where the story is being played out, so it's actually turned into a video game, and then you can instead of having a token and going to an artist and asking them to make a portrait for you, you basically can build your own token. You just pay for it. It's a 3D miniature. Um, and you can basically refine it, you can customize it, blah, 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 blah. So you find a new piece of armor, so you just basically put it on it, things like that. And I think people will like it and people will do it. And then people predict at some point they will come to the, oh, I've sunk so much money into this now, I can't switch systems because I have invested so much situation where people will say, Uh, yes, there are other games out there, but I've already invested so much money in this, I'm just not going to switch. And this is what people call the locking in of the player. And I don't know how likely this is because I have spent easily thousands of euros on role-playing products. I've also bought secondhand, out of print stuff, which is very expensive sometimes. But my collection probably is around 2,000 euros worth of money. That includes um, magazines, and it's not necessarily by big publishers. It can also be independent publishers that have produced stuff. And then if I count all of the miniatures and anything like that in there, and also maybe the painting, and also board games like the fourth edition based board games for D&D, I get easily to 2,000 euros. And but it's all different systems. It's not just the one system, it's several systems, you know. And then, of course, you kind of go, okay, um, once I've invested all of this, do I really want to switch? And then do I find somebody to switch with? Because once you've got this online community going, you would need to find somebody from that community who plays a different system also online that you can move with them. But the chances are that you won't find anyone because you are so locked into this community. Then you would have to go out and find new people, and that can be different and difficult. And also, those of us who play role-playing games know that at a certain level, after the initial, let's say, 2 or 3 sessions, you get to a point where you really realize, do I gel with the people that I play with, and does it work from a storytelling perspective? If this is the way you play, or doesn't it? And I believe that probably using one D&D, gaming will be a lot more casual. It will be a lot less driven by people's emotions and characters. So it will be story driven and it will be combat driven because otherwise you don't need a 3D environment. Um, and it will change the way Dungeons and Dragons adventures will be written in the future. I believe that it's probably going to go old school in a way in which the dungeon crawl is the main draw of the game because that's what is most easily done in a 3D environment. And Discourse Miniatures was actually quite funny. And she said, well, you know, I can totally imagine that they may even offer fully voice acted NPCs that you can just plug in as the DM. And I was like, yeah. And then probably with their own miniature, fully animated, you know, to really turn this into a movie. And then I was watching a video clip on YouTube, and this person, I think his name is Beck Me Berserker, referenced and linked 2 articles which both deal with a topic that forget chess and go, the games, when you're talking about development of artificial intelligence. The next level of AI involves getting them to run Dungeons and Dragons. And I'm not kidding you. This is actually true. These 2 articles deal with research into artificial intelligence and trying to teach the AI engine to tell stories like a dungeon master and to provide plots and to react to player interactions. And I believe that this will happen one day. And then you have the perfect platform, one D&D, where you have an artificial dungeon master and they can play and cater for hundreds of players. They never grow tired. They never are not prepared. You know, it's perfect. You know, it's like playing against a chess computer when you don't have an opponent that matches you, or you don't have anybody to play with. And I think this is actually a possibility that will happen, and probably in the next 5 years. I mean, I'm not crystal ball gazing here, but I know that AI is making such large strides. So now, of course, the question is, what does this mean for me? Well, for me personally, in the beginning, nothing much, because I am not going to buy a new book. I don't need any new books. I don't need a new system. I've got what I want. The stuff that we feel doesn't suit us, and I think in 5th edition we haven't really done any home brewing, except the other day we again reiterated that if you crit on your attack, or if the DM crits on his attack or her attack, um, and let's say we're talking about Sacred Flame, where you usually get a deck save. If I crit on my Sacred Flame, then the opponent doesn't get a deck save, but it hits automatically. I don't know if this is actually somewhere in the rules, but we just decided that this was the case. The other way around, if I faced a cleric and they hit me with Sacred Flame and they critted, I would also not get a deck save. So, you know. Um, I don't know if this is a homebrew house rule or if this is official, but we just decided that this is the way it is because a crit is so seldom, it should be special, not just doubling up on damage. But other than that, I think maybe sometimes with regard to movement, can I move here or is this blah blah blah? But by and large, we just use the vanilla version of 5th edition. We have basically access to all of the books, so we can use Xanathar or Tasha's Cauldron, and we do use them, but that's it. I don't need any more. And if I feel that I would need something special for my cleric or something, then I would sit down with my DM and say, well, I think my cleric should be able to do this or blah blah blah, or I've seen this spell. It's not a cleric spell, blah blah blah, but I think it could make sense, and so on and so forth. And these are all things that you can do, and people have been doing for a very long time. Now, the next question, of course, is what about streaming? And this is always something that I've been wondering about because we know from the video game streamer scene that especially when it comes to monetizing your streams, and most of them do, they are on Twitch, they have, like they provide sometimes before and sometimes even in-game clips of on YouTube, and it's highly annoying. But of course, a lot of the time, the soundtrack is copyrighted. And I learned this year that there are streamer versions of games which you can use where the soundtrack has then been replaced with something that isn't copyrighted so that you can stream it without having to go through the whole copyright issue on YouTube and then being demonetized. I thought this was really interesting because it only pertained to the soundtrack, to the music, but not to the actual story. And there I find it very interesting because depending on the game, once I've watched somebody play the game, I'll not play it myself. I will not buy it because I'm like, now I know what it's about. I'm not going to do it. So if I was Nintendo, for example, why would I let people do this? Or have they done the math and said, okay, well, for every 5 viewers who watch this YouTube stream of our game, we get two new cells. That's good. And if you have then streamers that have like hundreds of thousands of views for a particular stream, you can imagine that Nintendo or Sony or whoever is going to get a lot of money out of this. So I believe that they've done the maths and it works for them. When we look at role-playing games, that is something that I was wondering about anyway, because as soon as you start quoting from, let's say, the book, so we found the Tome of Strahd and we read out aloud to the audience and to the players because they didn't know either what the Tome of Strahd contains. What you're reading out is flavor text, which is copyrighted. So, interestingly enough, I didn't get a copyright strike for this. I don't monetize my videos, but that would be interesting if Wizards of the Coast can go back and say, well, actually, you're infringing our copyright, which we are, or would this still be fair use? Because it's not like we're quoting a piece of their work in order to comment on it. So, for example, saying if you do a diachronical comparison of Strahd and Strahd, like 2nd edition or 3rd edition Strahd and 5th edition Strahd, and then you say, well, in 5th edition Strahd, his history is explained as follows. You quote 2 lines, but in 3rd edition, his history was described as, and then you quote 2 lines, which would be fair use because you are commenting on it in an almost scientific fashion. We're doing a comparison between 2 works, which is perfectly fine. So that is something that I'm not sure about. I have used the D&D logo, which I will cease and desist from now on. Other people are doing it as well, but I've decided not to do it. Using the term Dungeons and Dragons, again, is a question because that is definitely a trademark. So if I say Dungeons and Dragons and use it to announce a game that we're going to stream, I'm not sure. I may actually even be in breach of their trademark rights by using it. I'm not sure. Which is also why Paizo, for example, always refer to it as the greatest role-playing game of all time or the best-selling, blah, blah, blah. I may actually do this. It's a mouthful, but just to be on the safe side. With regard to using the game mechanics, and this is where it again gets interesting, these are not copyrighted and are not copyrightable. Um, Nor are stat blocks. So you can use the stat blocks of any monster, of any role-playing game, and use it for your own purposes. You can even reproduce it because they are not copyrightable. Because they are not actually creative enough. Because copyright is a very interesting beast. I know this myself because I am an author and I have published works, and there is the so-called VG Wort, which is a copyright company, as it were, that basically ensures that people who have created stuff and published it get royalties on that. You don't make a lot of money, but you sometimes get 100 euros here or there, which is always nice. Now, the question is, what can be copyrighted? And that is anything, and I'm going to read the German wording from the paragraph 2 of the Urhebergesetz, so the copyright law in Germany. And I'm going to read it and then I'm going to give you some information in English. Sprachwerke wie Schriftwerke, Reden und Computerprogramme, Werke der Musik, pantomimische Werke einschließlich der Werke der Tanzkunst, Werke der bildenden Künste einschließlich der Werke der Baukunst und der angewandten Kunst und Entwürfe solcher Werke. Lichtbildwerke einschließlich der Werke, die ähnlich wie Lichtbildwerke geschaffen werden. Filmwerke einschließlich der Werke, die ähnlich wie Filmwerke geschaffen werden. Darstellungen wissenschaftlicher oder technischer Art, wie Zeichnungen, Pläne, Karten, Skizzen, Tabellen und plastische Darstellungen. So, any works related to language, like something that you wrote, something that you spoke, so speeches you gave, and computer code. Works of music, pantomime works, mimes. So basically, if you even don't talk, but just use your facial expression, that's already copyrightable. And works of performed dance, sculpture as well as painting, buildings, as well as sketches thereof, photographs, and any works that are created in a way that is like photographs, so possibly maybe holograms, things like that. Films, including works that are created in a similar way as films. Any form of technical drawings or scientific drawings, maps, sketches, tables, and also 3D models that you may create. So it's quite extensive. However, linguistic works do not only contain literature. So it's not like it has to be high literature, or because then again the question is what is high, but it also includes things like newspaper articles, song texts, recipes, very interesting, and source code for software. And basically the thing is that in order to have your text copyrighted, it needs to have been created by a human being. It actually says so. If it's been done by a computer program using algorithms, then it is not copyrightable. it has to be the result of, and here the German word is geistige Tätigkeit, of some mental strain that you have put in. It needs to be an idea that has been expressed. So it has to be, and this is very important, it cannot just be a spontaneous kind of like flash that you have and you're just going to express this. It has to be a solid idea. And that may mean it has to be a lot more in depth than, like just saying, oh, my elf can turn invisible. And this is where we come to a very interesting thing. Um, Lots of things that WotC say is owned by them isn't owned by them. You can use it freely. And that is all of their game mechanics because they cannot be copyrighted. And it's all of their stat blocks. It gets interesting where you get to things like the fly spell, for example. They cannot copyright this. Why can't they copyright it? Number one, fly is a common English word. And the idea that magic exists in some world isn't a new thing. We see magic existing in literature and mythology in all kinds of cultures, and for the last several thousand years, as far back as we want to go with regard to mythology. I mean, the Greek gods fly, you know. Um, so the idea that there is magic that lets you fly isn't original, cannot be in any way copyrighted. You can also not say that my elf can fly, and that's why I can copyright this elf. Because that would be one that's not enough of a solid idea to be copyrightable. However, if you then start talking about this elf, he can fly or she can fly, she has this name, this is her background, her parents, blah, 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 and she goes through all of these adventures and you tell a story around her, she does become copyrightable. Maybe not parts of the story, but the whole idea of this particular elf who happens to be able to fly becomes copyrightable. So when you create your own role-playing game character, even if this character has stats that are provided by WotC's rules, after a while, this character becomes copyrightable and it is your being. Not anyone can come and say, oh, I'm just going to take Sarah Tobin from London. She's a World of Darkness character of mine. She's a vampire. She's dead now, but basically this has now been my creation. I can sit down and write stories about her. I can publish those stories. She's mine. Nobody else can because she is enough of a copyrightable character. And this is the next step that you have to be aware of. You don't have to go and basically say, oh yes, I am going to take action to copyright her. Unlike a trademark or a patent, which you have to file and register, copyright doesn't have to be filed or registered anywhere. You can do so. In Germany, you can go to a notary, you can take the text that you've written and you put it with the notary. They will give you a stamp and you pay 150 euros, and they will say that at the time such and such date, such and such time, this work was placed with me, and anybody who uses the characters of this work later on is in breach of copyright. But you don't have to. And so you you establish copyright as soon as you create a solid enough idea that is inventive enough, that has enough creative power behind it, then it is yours. And the copyright in Germany, for example, lasts 70 years after your death. So if you publish a work, people cannot use it or use the characters that you've created until you've been dead for 70 years. So, for example, most recently in the late, I want to say 2010s, or early 2010, sorry, the works of H.P. Lovecraft entered the public domain. And now you can freely copy them, distribute them, because he's been dead for over 70 years. And And so this is again where you have to be aware that while the stat blocks are not copyrightable, any flavor text in those stat blocks is copyrightable. So I would even go so far as to say if something is called Leomund's Tiny Hut, I would be careful to drop the Leomunds from it. You can call it whatever, Tiny Sanctuary. Use the same stats, it's fine, you can publish it, but leave out the Leomunds because I'm pretty sure that this could even be a trademark. I'm not sure, but Forgotten Realms, for example, is. You cannot use the term Forgotten Realms just thinking it's fine. And this is where we get to the next point. Wizards of the Coast want to make money. And of course they have to because they're a company. And that's where we all have to be a little bit mindful of the fact that they are now saying if you're a third party producer that makes more than $750,000 a year, we want money from you. It's interesting to me that they haven't done this before because I would have thought that this is something that they would be doing and would have been doing because, hey, you're using their intellectual property if you are. And that's where it gets interesting because a lot of the stuff that they say that you're using that you shouldn't be using or that we will make you pay for isn't something that is copyrightable. They can't make you um, use it. So if I was to build my own world and I want to use 5th edition rules, I just take all of the stat blocks, I just dump them in there, I give everything a different name that somehow isn't like a normal common English word like fly, like um, even the term spider climb. That's a common word. Leomund's Tiny Hut or Tensor's Disk or whatever it's called, I would say I would call this something different if I really want to have this spell. But everything else, just leave out the whole flavor text in it and you're fine. Um, and you just have to be careful that, for example, you don't write a story and you use the villain Count Strahd, because Strahd von Zarovich definitely is a copyrighted character. If you ever Google copyright in Lord of the Rings, you get quite interesting pages where they actually list what terms or names have been copyrighted that you cannot use. So I'm just quoting from this. So for example, Stone of Erech, Quenya, Phial of Galadriel, Narsil, also Sword of Elendil, Narya, Ring of Fire, Nenya, the Ring of Adamant, Dol Baran, Dol Guldur, Dorwinion, Druadan Forest, Dunharrow, Anduin, Angmar, Anorian, Archet, Arnor, Bagend, Bagshot, Roe, Barad-dur, Baranduin, also Brandywine, and so on and so forth. Radagast the Brown, Quickbeam, Puckleman, Puddyfoot, Proudfoot, Gan Burigan, Gildor Inglorion, Gimli, Gloin, Glorfindel, Goldbury, Gollum Smeagol, also Tarhald. Oh, he's got a third name, I didn't realize. Black Riders, also Nazgul, the Nine, Ringwraiths. That doesn't mean that you can't talk about Black Riders, but you cannot talk about Black Riders. In terms of, as soon as you capitalize it and the two words, and you say, well, these are 9 people or possibly up to 9 people, blah, blah, blah. But of course, you can say somebody's a Black Rider because they're cloaked in black, or somebody is, I don't know, like a White Rider is a person maybe with white skin and they're sitting on a horse, so they're a White Rider, as opposed to a Black Rider, somebody who's got black skin is also riding. That is something you can do, but in this particular context, Black Riders is, of course, not free for you to use. So in a way, this is something that you have to be mindful of. And I'm pretty sure that if you were to look for copyrighted information by, let's see what we find here, copyright associated with Dungeons and Dragons, you will also probably get a very long list of terms that you cannot use or shouldn't use because they're copyrighted. Mind you, TSR has been sued over this because they used the term hobbit. They had to remove it. They have replaced it with the term halfling. They have been sued by Chaosium because they used some of their Call of Cthulhu-esque deities that Chaosium owned the rights to, they in turn have sued people as well. So it's a give and take. But a lot of things that they use that they might make you think you can't use are, of course, freely usable. You can use anything from the classical pantheon, from the Nordic pantheon, and they use those quite frequently when you look at the books. They give you different pantheons. The Greeks are there, the Nordics are there. You cannot use Big B, or you shouldn't be using Vecna even. So when you play Vecna Lives, you might want to reterm this because just to be on the safe side, because I believe that at some point, not my channel or not most people's channels will be faced with the fact that they are saying, oh, you're streaming our games, you are using copyrighted or trademarked even names. You cannot do that. This might be something that they might want to do if they come down on the gaming community quite aggressively. If this will be to their detriment, I'm not so sure, because they will probably have enough people who say, yeah, well, I'm not quite happy, but one D&D, let's just go for it. And then the market will win. And then they may come after people who make a lot of money. And then the big question is, do you want to go for a lawsuit? So what I'm saying is there are two sides to it. Number one, of course, Wizards of the Coast need to make money. And with the pandemic over, I believe that sales will decrease, and they have apparently already decreased. It's been less successful than it was at the height of the pandemic. They may say, you cannot easily publish third-party stuff anymore because it cannot be imported anywhere, because you can go to Roll20 and there are plenty of things that have been published for for fifth edition that you can import. I actually don't see anything there because I find it highly confusing. The marketplace doesn't really help me, and it's also quite difficult to really um, discern if this is high quality or not, so I hardly ever buy. I've never bought anything there. But what I didn't know, for example, is that Dungeon Masters Guild, if you publish stuff there, you have to pay 50% to of the revenue to Wizards of the Coast, number one, and number two, you lose the right to your work to them. They can use it. If you've got a really brilliant idea, they can just take it away from you and use it for their own ends, which I didn't realize. I was actually quite surprised because I know a lot of stuff that's been published there, and I've also bought some things there. Um, that gave me pause. Um, so they're doing it already. But if you then have to basically use one D&D, they can be even more of a gatekeeper and say, well, you cannot go in there unless you give us all your money. So that is then a question of, do you want to support this potentially aggressive stance that they're taking? I mean, I'm not one of those people who will go, oh my God, this is going to be the end of the hobby, because it won't. But some say, well, maybe other companies are going to follow as well. Maybe Chaosium is going to do this too. Maybe, other big publishers, Paizo is going to do this too. Or some say Pathfinder came out as an evolved version of 3.5 because people didn't want to play a 4th edition D&D. So maybe now with the 6th edition and all of the stuff and all of the, like controversy around that and 1D&D, maybe another company, maybe even Paizo, will take that and create something that is a lot less like Pathfinder, because I played Pathfinder 1st edition and we played it for a long time, but it is, to me, too much crunch. There is so much in there that I'm prestige classes and blah blah. I'm like, I don't care. It's too systemic for me. I've not looked at 2nd edition, but maybe they will say, okay, we're going to create a third product that is less like Pathfinder, more like 5th edition, to cater to people who like 5th edition, who want to get new stuff for it, new adventures, because of course the support for 5th edition will cease. They will not bring out new stuff. They say that it's all backward compatible, or downward, I prefer that term. But then again, if it's only available on one D&D on the platform, if you have to go to that platform and buy online content only, I'm out anyway because I don't do this. So we will see what happens. All I'm saying is that we need to accept that Wizards of the Coast is going to have to make money, and they will try to do this in many ways, some of which may clash with how some of us view the hobby and how some of us live the hobby. And then it comes down to every single one of us to make a choice. Will we go with this? Because let's say you are a channel that lives off of producing or even providing information about new role-playing trends. If you don't go with the times, you will be out of the game. You will lose money. So I think just out of sheer necessity to be always at the forefront of the fad, to be always hip, most channels that professionally deal with role-playing games will embrace 6th edition. They will have to, because I predict that 6th edition will bring in new players and will have a lot of clout in the marketplace. And it will be a success. I'm absolutely sure of this. I may be eating my words in 5 years' time, but I believe it will be a success because they have done the market research. They have managed to find out how to attract people, and they've also seen what puts people off. Lack of DMs, lack of, oh, this is like the experience that I saw on YouTube, lack of streamlining. They need to take out the personal element to make it a consumable product, and I think this is what's going to happen. I wish them good luck because they are a company and they have to make money, and lots of people depend with their livelihoods on it. But it doesn't really affect me personally because it will not change the way I play role-playing games. And I don't just play D&D, I play other games as well. So this is my more than 2 cents on this, and I wish you all a pleasant start into the new year. Talk to you soon. Bye.